Hello. It is so good to see you guys. I love you. I was just thinking during worship, and this might seem redundant, but do you guys know that God died for you? And that makes you really, really valuable. And I am really honored to be able to come and just share today and to continue our series on Hebrews. We're continuing with Hebrews chapter 11, and I get the really fun chapter, legitimately, about faith. We're going to talk about faith today. And I'm going to share with you right off the bat what my goal is for this morning. I've got a goal that I'm hoping it will focus us. My goal is to convince you that your great faith or your lack of faith is entirely your choice, and that your doubt does not actually determine your faith. And I told Olivia, my wife, that I was going to say that, and she was like, "Whoa, that's bold." And I said, "I know." So I want to convince you today as we look at Hebrews. So if you have your Bibles, open to Hebrews chapter 11. If you don't have a Bible, just raise your hand. Our ushers will bring you one. And if you don't have a Bible and you want one, just a side note, please take this one as a gift to you. The Bible is amazing because it's the one place we can go where every single word is 100% God's voice. So if you don't have one, please take this one as our gift to you. So before we dive into chapter 11, I'm going to give some context just to let us know kind of what is the purpose of chapter 11. At the end of chapter 10, the author starts talking about enduring faith. And so coming into chapter 11, the author is going, all right, I'm going to show you what this faith thing is. I'm going to tell you what it is, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when done right. But the author also knows that the best way to learn about faith is to see it demonstrated. And the best way to have faith grow in our hearts is to walk with faith-filled people. And so that's what chapter 11 is. At first glance, it just looks like a big list of names, but it's actually the author taking us on a walk with faith-filled people. So let's take a look at Hebrews 11, chapter 1. Let's just dive in and see the first thing that the author says about faith. It says this: "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance of what we do not see." Now, that might seem a little bit strange. It seems a little strange to me because generally, if you're hoping for something, or if you don't see something, you're not really sure about it, right? But the author is saying that faith gives us the assurance of our hope and of what we can't see. Is that a little strange to you guys? That's a little weird to me. But I love what John Oswald Sanders says about this. He says, "Faith enables the believing soul to treat the future as present and the invisible as seen." I'm going to just read that one more time because it's really, really good. It says, "Faith enables the believing soul, us, the believer, to rightly treat the future as present and the unseen as seen." You see, we're physical creatures, and we relate really, really well to things that we can engage with our senses. You know, like our sight, our touch, our taste. But spiritual things kind of slip through our fingers a little bit. It lacks the texture and the tangibility for us to be able to grab a hold of it and hold it fast, to pull it into our hearts the same way that we can with physical things. Spiritual things just tend to slip through our fingers. And so what they're saying in Hebrews is that faith actually gives substance to spiritual things. Faith provides us with like a baseball catcher's mitt that, like, when things would normally slip through our fingers, faith allows us to actually catch it and grab hold of it. Does that make sense? I've got an illustration that I want to show you to just kind of help demonstrate this. We put a cloth over this so that nobody would think it's part of communion and accidentally drink this water that my hands have been touching. So good job, nobody drank it. There we go. Cool. So here's kind of what I want to demonstrate. So let's assume that the things that we have in this physical world can all be summed up, the things that we can relate to really well and easily are summed up in just our ability to physically grab it. So I can physically grab this pitcher. And it's easy for me. But however, spiritual things of God's kingdom are like the water that's inside this pitcher. As much as we try, we're grabbing at it, and it just keeps on slipping through our fingers. But here's the thing. Faith, now watch carefully, because this is really cool. faith enables the believer, us, to reach into the spiritual things of God and actually to grab hold of it. Right? That's a good illustration. I was really proud of this one. It enables us to grab hold of it, and so that we can actually have substance to spiritual things and pull it into our lives, into our hearts, and receive like God's reality as our reality. Does that make a little bit more sense? I love that. You guys are awesome. Thanks for letting me do that. We can actually look at unseen things or things that we hope for, the spiritual things of God's kingdom, like God himself, like God's promises, and we actually like reach in to God's kingdom and can grab a hold of it. I could do this all day. This is probably the most fun thing I've ever done on stage. This is awesome. Let's see. So faith allows us to hold with confidence what we shouldn't be able to hold at all. Does that make sense? Faith allows us to grab hold of what would normally just be hope. But instead of just hope, we have assurance. Right? Ta-da, magic. Okay, cool. We're all done with that. You guys are amazing. Thanks for letting me do that. That was a lot of fun. You don't have to applaud for that. That was okay. I appreciate it, though. See, so many of us think that faith is contrary to reason. But that's not actually true. Faith isn't contrary to reason. Faith is a participation in and agreement with a higher reason than our own. That's what faith is. Another thing, moving on, that the author tells us about what constitutes true faith comes in verse 6. So let's throw that up on the screen. And the reason why I want to highlight this is because this is the point. This is the point of this whole chapter. This is the point of this message. This is what we're trying to get across right now. It says this: without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And so first of all, notice it does not say, without faith, it is really, really, really difficult to please God. Or without faith, it is barely possible to please God. He's much more forceful. He says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. That's a pretty good reason for why a life of faith is important. Does anybody else in here want to please God with their life? Show of hands. Yep. Okay, great. I'm so glad that you guys are here. That is why this is important, because without faith, it is impossible to do that. But look at as well what the author says right after that. He says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. But then he says, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So he's pointing out two characteristics of sincere faith right now. He's saying faith, A, believes that God exists. That's indispensable. We know that one. Faith has to believe that God exists. But also, faith expects that God will bless. That's also true faith. It's said that some of us believe that God is almighty and that he may do all. And some of us believe that God is all wise and that he can do all. But that God is all love and will do all, there we stop short. I'm going to say that one more time because this is so essential. It says, it is said that some of us believe that God is almighty and may do all, or that God is all wise and can do all, but that God is all love and will do all, there we stop short. You please God through faith, and part of that is obviously believing that he exists, which is indispensable, but then also expecting that God will work and that he'll bless and that he'll be involved in your life as we pursue him. That is counted as faith. So that's what faith is. But faith is more than just a mindset as well. Faith is never genuine if it is not infused with action. They're not even two separate things. They're the same thing. If you've got faith and you don't have action, it's not faith. It's something else. So let's take a look at what the action of faith looks like. Just practically, we know what faith is, but now, what does it look like for us to live it? How do I live a life of faith? Let's practically look at what that looks like in Hebrews 11. So in this chapter, just like I said earlier, we're going to encounter like a big list of names, and it's oftentimes called God's Hall of Faith or the Faith Hall of Fame, one or the other. And I'm just going to single out 3 of these stories for us to learn something from about what it looks like to live a life of faith. It'll teach us how to walk in faith. The first people that we encounter come in verse 4. It's Cain and Abel. And I'm going to be reading from the Passion Translation just because I love how it phrases it so simply. And so that'll be on the screen behind me. But it says this. It says, faith moved Abel to choose a more acceptable sacrifice to offer God than his brother Cain. We're actually going to stop right there. If you don't remember the story of Cain and Abel, they're 2 sons of Adam and Eve. And one day, they both bring God an offering. However, Cain brought God an offering that was convenient. Abel brought the offering that God was looking for, the sacrifice. Cain brought a fruit basket. Abel, on the other hand, brought the blood offering for sin that we've been learning about through Hebrews that was required by God. Cain brought an offering that was just convenient. When I was younger, just like any child, my parents would ask me to clean my room. And I'd walk into my room and I'd be like, okay, I got this. There's a lot of mess in here. And so I think about it for a second, and then I just take all my clothes and I kind of just shove it under the bed. And then, kind of sort of like cover it with boxes or other things like toys. Be like, they won't see that. And of course they did. And they come back into my room and like, Jesh, I thought we asked you to clean your room. And I'm like, I did. I just did it my way. And they're like, that doesn't count. And that's the same thing that Cain did. He obeyed, but he did it his way. Faith obeys on God's own terms. That's the first thing the first point out of these 3 that I want you to get. Faith obeys on God's terms, not ours. Another story about my process in learning this. When I was in high school, it was my job to mow our yard every week. We lived on a corner, and it's not big for out here, but for a city boy in Chicago, it felt like a massive yard. And so and we didn't have a riding mower. I had the old school push mower. So it was my job to mow the yard every week. But I decided that it was also my privilege to decide when it really needed to be mowed. So I would go and I'd let the grass grow and grow for weeks until I finally decided all right, I guess maybe now it's time to mow. And I still remember my dad sat down with me one day and he looked at me to talk about this and he's like, Jesh, you obey and you do help out, but you only do it when it's convenient for you. Dang. But I realized that I do that not just with him, but I do that with God too. Several years ago, I did this missions organization called YWAM, or Youth with a Mission. And when we got there, the first teaching that we received was about relinquishing our rights to God. It's about anything that I felt like I deserved in life, that I'm basically kind of holding my own privilege over. I'm not really letting God be God over that part of my life. And so they're saying hey, it's time to let God identify what those places are and to relinquish your rights of those things to God. And so they had us spread out and take some time alone with the Lord and ask him, hey, God, what do I need to relinquish to you? And so I sat down and I listened and I felt like God said, Jeshua, I want you to relinquish to me your right to tell me no. Gulp. No. That's so challenging. But I realized that I had always reserved my right to tell God no when he would ask me to do something that might be a little too weird, a little too scary or out of my comfort zone. And I just kept my ability to tell him no as this safety net that I could fall back on to kind of cop out or opt out of a certain thing of obedience. And so I would obey when it was convenient. I was obey when I was certain. But faith is obeying on God's terms, not our terms. So that's the first lesson. Second one, let's continue on in verse 7. We read about Noah. And it says this, faith opened Noah's heart to receive revelation and warnings from God about what was coming, even things that had never been seen. But he stepped out in reverent obedience to God and built an ark that would save him and his family. And so just remember, prior to the flood, there had never been rain before. Nobody had ever seen it. Nobody had ever heard of it. And yet Noah is preparing for this global flood. Can you imagine the ridicule and the catcalls and how insane everybody must have thought that he was? Hey, Noah, what you doing? I'm building a boat. Why? Because there's going to be a lot of rain and the world is going to flood. Noah, what's rain? I'm not exactly sure, but God said it was going to happen, so I'm building a boat. How insane do you think that he must have, maybe felt, but how insane everybody else must have thought that he looked? Faith is not often very popular. Faith is often laughed at, yet the Bible says that Noah reverently obeyed the Lord before he saw any sign or demonstration of what the Lord was going to do. John 20 talks about who we often refer to as Doubting Thomas. And the story is that Jesus died and he rose again from the dead and he appears to all of his disciples, but Thomas is not there. And so Thomas comes back and meets with the disciples and they're like, dude, Jesus rose from the dead. He's alive. And Thomas is like, I will not believe that until I see it with my own eyes. And a little bit later, after that, Jesus appears to the disciples again, and this time Thomas is with them, and Thomas is like, they were lying. I believe. You're alive. But listen to what Jesus says to Thomas. He says, because you have seen me, you've believed. But blessed are those who have not seen and have still believed. That's what faith is. Faith will believe and obey without seeing or before seeing. Another example, Abraham had a promise from God that he would have a son, and he waited without seeing until he was 100 years old. That's as old as some of you guys are going to be before you see the Vikings win a Super Bowl. But you guys persevere with faith even without sight, and I applaud you for it. That is amazing. The Bears are awful this year. I've lost all faith in the Bears, so I just figured I'd let you guys join me in my suffering. The last lesson on faith that I want to point out comes in verse 8, talking about Abraham. It says, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. So basically, here's what happens in this story. God says, hey, Abraham, I have this land for you. You're going to love it. It's amazing. You're going to receive it as an inheritance. So just pack up your family, pack up your house, everything you have, your clan, and just get a move on because this land is your inheritance. And Abraham is like, Lord, you are amazing. I love you. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Where are we going? And God's like, I'm not telling. Start walking. Right? But yet Abraham obeyed and he believed the Lord, and he packed up everything and set off to a land that God was going to show him later? At some point, not knowing where he was going. Noah believed without seeing. Abraham believed without knowing. Now, so many of us are addicted to details. We need to know, why, God, why, or how? How is this going to work out? But true faith doesn't need to know why. It doesn't need to know how when it knows who is asking. And that's enough. Real faith doesn't need to know why. It does not need to know how when it knows who, and that's enough. Real faith obeys without knowing or before knowing. I mentioned earlier that I was part of this missions organization, Youth with a Mission, and when I went there, we spent 2 months in Mexico City doing some outreach, doing some missions on the street. And when I was there, I met this 5-year-old orphan girl. I was told she was an orphan, and she just lived on the street. Her name was Monsi, and she just latched onto me for some reason, and she loved me, and my heart was just completely captured for this girl, and I just did my best to just to love on her, to demonstrate Christ, to get her connected with the church that was there and in their kids ministry, so that when we left, that she'd be able to have some people taking care of her. And long story short, we get her connected to that church, but then when I go back to America, I am trying to stay in contact with them, and they let me know, hey, she kind of just disappeared. We don't know where she went. She's gone. And my heart just broke. I'm like, I don't know what's happened to this girl. And so, I was about 17 at the time, and for the next 2 years, I have a picture of her on my desktop or my laptop, background, and I just pray for her, nearly every day, until one day, I felt like God dropped in my heart and said, hey, you should go back to Mexico City and look for her 2 years later. And I'm thinking, God, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think you've thought this through all the way, Lord. And Because I don't know if you guys know about like Mexico City area, but it's got just about under the same population as the state of Texas. And so I'm thinking, God, you're asking me to play a game of Where's Waldo with 22 to 28 million people on the page. The odds don't seem in my favor, to say the least. The odds don't seem in your favor, Lord. But I had no idea how this was going to work out. But like I just obeyed and went. And long story short, again, I could be here all day talking about this. But long story short, we end up going. And the first day that we're there, miraculously, we find this girl. We find her on the street, and we actually find out that she does have a family, but her family just like works there in the street, and so she just roams around and scavenges and like eats out of the trash and lives on the street like all day long and is having like terrible influences. But because of this trip, we get to meet like her parents, and actually two of her sisters. We get to share the gospel with them, get them reconnected with the church, and this girl and her two sisters are now reconnected with this like kids ministry, are taking care of them and giving them a good influence instead of the like influences that they were getting on the street. And God just did an amazing work. And my point of all this is that God didn't give a blueprint. He didn't give any details. He's just like, hey, go. And I didn't think it was going to work. I did not like think that God was going to do that. My part was just like, all right, YOLO. Let's do it. And God did the rest. All he needed was my obedience, and God could become God in that situation. So just in summary, there are 4 things so far that I want you guys to take away. Here they are. This is what faith does. Faith enables us to grab hold of spiritual things. It's number 1. Faith believes that God exists and that he rewards those who pursue him. It does things on God's terms, not our terms. And it will believe and obey without seeing or knowing. Those are the 4 things I want you to take away. But let's talk about unbelief for a second. Unbelief is an interesting thing because oftentimes we kind of think of our lack of faith or our unbelief, and we consider it something that we can't help. You know, I can't help my uncertainty. I can't help my doubts or my questions. And, you know, sometimes that's actually true, but I've got good news and challenging news for us. And it's this. It's that your questioning, your doubt, doesn't actually mean that you don't have faith. My questioning and my doubt does not mean that I don't have faith. Lack of faith is not the presence of doubt. Lack of faith is lack of obedience in the presence of doubt. Does that make sense? I'm going to say that one more time. Lack of faith is not the presence of doubt. Lack of faith is a lack of obedience in the presence of doubt. In the Bible, one of the main words that we actually translate into English as unbelief, it can actually mean a stubborn refusal to believe or act according to God's will. And we just learned about obedience, and so unbelief is actually the stubborn refusal to obey God. Unbelief isn't uncertainty. It's what we do with the uncertainty that makes it unbelief. God doesn't even look for a people who are never uncertain. He does look for a people who will still obey him in the middle of our uncertainty. I've got an example of this. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, Jesus is talking to Simon Peter, and he's about to call him as a disciple. And Simon Peter is a professional fisherman. That's what he does as a job. And they had been out all night fishing. They'd caught nothing. And this guy knows what he's doing. You know, he knows what he's doing. And they'd caught nothing. And Jesus looks at him and says, hey, cast your net on the other side of the boat. And I can almost imagine Peter's eye roll. Like, for real? And he says this. Simon replies to Jesus and he says, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the net. That answer is the key to everything. Lord, I don't understand. I don't even think this will work. But because you say so, I will. There is so much power in that statement. The key thing is not what you think about something. Peter didn't think he was going to catch any fish. It's not what you feel about it. It's about your choice, whether or not you obey. That's what makes it faith. All of these examples that we just read about in Hebrews, like Noah. Noah's probably not coming up with good reasons to build the ark. He just obeyed because God said to do it. Abraham probably didn't feel great about leaving his home not knowing where he was going. He certainly didn't feel great about God asking him to sacrifice his son and just hoping that somehow he'll save him. But because God said so, they obeyed, and that was counted to them as faith. And that's true with all of these names in this hall of faith. It's not that this passage does not say, so God or Noah had faith because God told him there was going to be a flood, and he had full confidence that it was going to flood, and that the rain was going to come, and he could see in his mind's eye that the rain was going to come, and God showed him ahead of time what the rain was going to look like, and therefore he had great faith. It says, God said, and Noah reverently obeyed, and that was counted to him as faith. He probably was a bit uncertain in there. I want to live a life where God knows that he has my yes before he ever asks me something. I want to walk close to the heart of God, to be trusted with his heart, to be trusted with his voice because of obedience. Do you? That intimacy is available to every single one of us. Every single person in this room has that intimacy available to us. Yet it requires a life of faith. And faith requires us to count a cost. It requires us to say, are we willing to give up our right to God to tell him no? Are we willing to give God our yes and obey even when we don't see, or we don't know, or we don't understand? When we do that, we are creating the space for God to come and to draw close, to transform us, to move mountains in our lives and through us. Through our obedience and through becoming trustworthy to the Lord through that. So when I said at the beginning that our great faith or our lack of faith is our choice, that is because for the believer, faith equals our obedience, not our certainty. Faith equals our obedience, not our certainty. So we're gonna pray in a sec, but before we do that, I actually want to call the ministry team up if you guys are here. I want to call you guys up now. And if you have been feeling a tugging on your heart as I've been talking, that you want to live a life of faith, marked with obedience to the Lord. If you want to walk close to God's heart and be trustworthy to him, then I want you to come up and receive prayer. There we go. Receive prayer from Bill and from Liv. I do not want you guys to leave here without responding to that. And just tell these guys, I just want to live that way. I want the courage to give God my yes. Don't leave here without getting prayer for that. Would you guys stand with me? I'm going to pray. Lord, I just thank you that you still have space for our doubt and uncertainty. That the presence of that doesn't mean that we don't have faith in you, but that you actually use those as a tool to draw us close to you. Lord, thank you that you are a big boy God and you can handle our adult questions, our tough questions. That if you are who you say you are, then there is no doubt or uncertainty or question that is too big for you that you would ever shy away from, but that you always draw us close to you through it. Lord, I pray for the courage to go and obey you, to choose to walk in faith in the face of our uncertainty, in the face of our fear, in the face of not knowing the details. I pray for faith, courage. Lord, I pray for just a relieving of the pressure of the lie that says that if we just believe hard enough that you will do a miracle. Lord, I pray that you would help us to know what's our job and what's your job, that our job is just the obedience. Your job is the miracle. Lord, today help us to take another step in the process of learning to consistently give you our yes. And God, I pray that you will help us know that you are almighty and that you may do all things, that you are all wise and that you can do all things, but most of all, that you are all love and that you will do all things. We love you, Jesus. Come and shepherd us closer to you, because we know that you know how to lead us closer to your heart better than we know how to follow you. Would you come and lead us there? We love you, Jesus. In your name, amen.